This is a production of Cornell University.
Yes, I indeed have had dinner with John Prine, and we can talk about that sometime. So I am absolutely delighted and to be able to talk about the Small Farms Program and the way that we're leaning into and trying to grow equity in agriculture. I just have to remember what this is. What I am hoping to do also is perhaps invite you to be in collaboration with us as we lean into this work. So I thought it would be good to start with just what is a small farm, since our program is focused on building the viability of small farms. And so we worked with the definition that USDA has sort of set out originally, and that these are farms that are grossing less than $300,000 a year. That the majority of the labor on the farm comes from the family or a small group of managers, and that the land area doesn't matter. The actual physical footprint of the farm isn't relevant, because some farms that are, say, calf grain can be quite large and fit within a small farm, and then others that are intensive vegetable production can be quite small and still be large farms or urban farms. And so they have a mix of business structures. They can have a mix of different kinds of commodities. That doesn't matter. So I just wanted to start with what a small farm is, because that almost ends up being the question that everyone asks me. And the reality is that over 90% of the farms in New York would be called small, in fact, the country. And in New York, over 80% of our farms are making less than $100,000 a year. So I just wanted you to have a sense of who would be included in this audience. And so the program itself was started in 2001 in response to a USDA report called Time to Act that focused on how we support small farms in our country. They were already aware of the challenges of being a small scale producer. And so the USDA funded and supported programs like this across the country. And the one at Cornell is one that I think is perhaps, we're really well known for our work in supporting small farms. There's other ones that are at Auburn University and in Oregon and Washington State. But we're the ones that really leaned into this work. And so in 2001, the program was started. I became the director in 2004. And over the last 20 some years, our program has evolved and changed. We've gone from a staff of just 2 people to 15. And so some of those folks are here in the room and some are online. But I'm going to try very hard to be pointing out these individuals as I go through the talk. So if you have other questions about the different projects and programs we do, you can follow up with those who are passionate in leading this work. So one of the things that has been incredibly helpful and a great gift to us recently is that the program now for our work and our history has been supported by the state. We are in the governor's budget. And that provides us the ability to create some long-term planning and some stability and to lean into the work that I'm about to describe, to lean in with a long-term. So we're really grateful for that. And none of this is possible without collaboration with a lot of other organizations. And so this is just some of the folks that we collaborate with. Each one of the people on our team is working with others, many other groups in order to do the work. So we see ourselves not only in providing direct education, but also network building and connecting. That is a piece that being here at Cornell really gives us a nice sort of global overview, but also a lot of opportunities to connect. One example of how we work really collaboratively is through our online courses. And I don't know if you're aware of it, but our program has hosted an online course portfolio for almost 20 years now. We probably have had thousands of people go through our courses. And these are led by Erica Panay and Kara, who's with us at the program, with some support from many others, including our comms team, Casey and Jamie, who are with us as well. But this is an example. Our instructors are educators within Cornell Cooperative Extension, people that work with nonprofits, and farmers themselves who join us to teach others about how to do various different activities. So what I wanted to do is just sort of share with you how we see ourselves in that we provide culturally appropriate resources, education, research, and networks to support small farming as a dignified, viable, and meaningful livelihood. And within that, we are deeply committed to equity and inclusivity. This came up for us in the work that we've done historically in developing new farmers. We knew that in the state, there was a lot of people getting questions about how do we support new farmers. And so we helped bring together a lot of these educators to create a whole platform and collection of materials. And so New York has had a very robust support system for new farmers, but when we look at who's showing up, and we've looked historically at who's showing up, they're mostly white. And so we started to ask the question, why is this happening? When on our online course platform, we see a lot of folks that are registering that represent very diverse communities. And so that was just one way in which we continue to focus, and we're reminded we have to be intentional in the ways we try to cultivate our outreach for these diverse communities. And so I'm going to tell you a lot more about that because we want to make sure that anyone and everyone feels welcome in our work. So as you can imagine, it's really hard. And again, I'm just going to do a quick overview of the program for those of you who aren't familiar with us, but then dig into the equity work we do. As you can imagine, it's really difficult to try to make priorities when you're working with this large and diverse group of farms. And so one of the ways we've done that historically is to host a summit, a statewide summit, where we work with educators around the state, and we host in-person and online conversations that are to identify what are the priorities for small farmers. What do they need to see? What is the support that they want? This is an example of one that we hosted in 2017 that was focused on the future of the livestock industry in the state. One of the outcomes we hope from these efforts is that we can move legislative action to support small farms, and that report was fundamental to securing state support for new livestock conditions. So that's just an example that we use in order to sort of identify some priorities and then develop teams or sort of support teams that are leading into it. I'm not sure what that. Okay. So some of the projects that we do are highlighted on our website, and I would invite you to go there. But some of these have come through the summits, and others have come through direct conversation with different stakeholders. But our programs range the gamut from directed sort of technical support, for example, with agroforestries and mushroom production and vegetables and tillage and urban ag development, to community support. And I'm going to talk mostly about community support, our work with veterans, where we're really building a networking community, and our work with Latino farmers, where we do both, provide directed education, but also create and provide other kinds of support. So I just wanted to highlight that there's a lot of different places, and we're always looking for collaborators, particularly in connections. And so students, faculty, and anyone who is interested in sort of working with us on this work, we would welcome that. We also do research. We've hosted all different kinds of research projects over the year, and we're continuing to think carefully about how we want to lean into research going forward. We've done surveys of farmers to understand opinions and perspectives. We did a fairly intensive one recently as part of the Vision 2050 project, which created a vision for New York agriculture that we hope to achieve by 2050. A qualitative research around farmer wellness and Latino farmer needs, as well as some scale-appropriate types of production technologies. And so this is just to point you to our website. And you can find a lot of more information both at our website, it'll link you to the work we do, but then also our YouTube channel, where we have an amazing collection of videos. I think the one with the most views is of a pig getting castrated. Don't ask me why that gets the most views, but it's a pretty important task if you have pigs. So, but it's there's all sorts of we have farmers telling their story. We have collections of different types of webinars that we've hosted, as well as directed conversations on particular topics. So in this work, as I mentioned, we have become more and more aware of the need to be focusing carefully and thinking more deeply about how we lean into supporting equity in agriculture. And as a program, and for me personally, I feel like one of our roles and one of our goals is to increase the number of farmers in New York who aren't white. Simply, just what does that look like? How do we do that? How do we do that together? This is not new work for us. The first time I met, back in 2004, I met with Black farmers in New York City, trying to figure out how do we do this work. I went to the first Bugs conference, to the Black Urban Growers Conference. We hosted trainings for service providers on how do we diversify our programming for beginning farmers. There's many different places where we've had touch points in supporting and thinking about equity in agriculture. But I think a lot of things changed with George Floyd. That incident and so the moment that we had in our history and our country's own reflections about racial equity really provided us with some more impetus to lean in more directly. But for me personally, it really started with my own family history. I don't know if you all know what that thing is I'm playing with over there, that little black item, that little thing. But I started my networking very young. But my mom and my dad came to this country as refugees in many ways. Their lives were threatened in India because of what they chose to do, which was fall in love and get married to each other. So we arrived here with nothing as immigrants and refugees, and that is my history and my story and part of my commitment to this work. My mother is who inspired me to farm and garden. I mean, I was in her hair and bugging her, so she gave me seeds and plants and said, go out there and make a garden. And I had no idea that that experience would be so fundamental to who I am today. That connection to soil and plants. So what would make agriculture better to me, even though I get to do this every day, is seeing more faces like mine on all of these national magazines. Produce grower, right? Small Farm Quarterly, which is sort of ironic since we produce that. but these, but it's this kind of, visibility and elevation that we need in order to actually make welcome farmers of color and those that have diverse identities in our agriculture. So I cannot dismiss the struggles that our farmers of color face today. We have today in our own communities examples of racism at play: obstruction, alienation, intimidation, and physical threats that farmers that we know have faced. Just because that they don't fit what we think as a farm. And so we cannot underestimate that. And even for our farmers that identify as LGBTQ+, that is, we have no numbers for who those farmers are. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But these false constructs are deeply embedded in the history of agriculture. And there's so many ways in which we are dealing with that on a day-to-day basis. So I just wanted to make sure I uplift that and that experience, but I also want to say that it's hands in soil to me that are where we connect. It is that joy that we have for feeling soil or or growing plants or growing animals and doing this work we call farming is where we have common ground. And every farmer I've spoken to, no matter their identities, no matter their race, just feel this joyful connection to land and to farming and to what they're doing for their communities. And that unifies us. And that's what we want to make elevate. So where do we start? Well, this is the 2017 data from the National Ag Statistics for New York. And so we start here because we want to know where we go from And in that, in the 2017 census, farmers could report the people involved in management in two ways. There's the primary producer, which is the top line, the person filling it out, who is sort of seen as the farm sort of lead. And then up to 4 producers, people that are contributing to the management of that farm. But you can see overwhelmingly, most of the farms are managed by individuals who would identify as white. And then the same holds true for producers. But when we look at the other races that are identified here, what we see is that less than 2% of our farms would be operated by farmers. If we look at just the first column, which lists Hispanic, we have 55,000 or more Latino, Hispanic identified individuals that support our agriculture in the state today, and less than 600 that are reported on the census. That's less than 1%. So these individuals who are deeply committed to agriculture, who have a lifetime of agriculture, who are incredibly talented in supporting the farms that support all of us, have had very little entrance and opportunity to become the entrepreneurs that they really want to be. So we'll talk about that. We made the maps with this data because we thought, well, if we're trying to lead into how we support increasing diversity, where are those farmers around the state? And in fact, it's interesting because we found clusters of farmers in Clinton County, St. Lawrence County, down in Orange County, which you'd expect being close to the city, and then Schuyler County, some surprising places. And so trying to identify what makes those places welcoming to different farmers, or is it just that people are reporting more? We're not sure. So we've been trying to think of it. Work with, we've had some conversations with our cooperative extension offices in those areas, but it's not easy to actually go out and ask people like, oh, where are the Black farmers in this space? Because people don't necessarily want to be self-identified. And so we're taking the approach of trying to build relationships, to build trust, in order to invite people to join us in process, in education, in learning, and networking. This is a different way that we've mapped this, and I'm happy to share these with anyone. We can't wait for the 2022 census to come out. It'll be out next year in May, so we can see where we've gone over the last 5 years. So again, trying to figure out how do we lean in to support a more diverse agriculture. We've been thinking about it, but so has Ag Markets. New York State Department of Ag has hosted a diversity and racial equity working group, and I served on that along with Ben Holton and Julie Suarez from Cornell. And it included researchers, educators, farmers themselves, nonprofit representatives, to identify what were the critical needs to support more farmers of color in the state. They had 21 recommendations that could be summarized into these 4 categories: access to infrastructure, education and training, capital, and land. But what's interesting is that those are the common needs of most beginning farmers. But what they need is more diligence and accountability on how those resources are actually committed and managed for farmers of color. That's the next level. They can't just be general grant programs. So, as I mentioned earlier, since 2001 as a program, we've been trying to support more work related to elevating the needs and interests of farmers of colors. And on campus, we've been doing this in different ways. The pandemic, sort of, as I mentioned, sort of slowed things down, but one of the things we were able to do is I collaborated with Gerard Aching from the Rural Humanities, and we hosted an Underground Railroad seminar for Black farmers in New York. So we invited Black farmers from across the state to meet up, and they met every week, and they read all of the books that the students were reading in the class on campus. But it was intense conversations of looking at history to inform the present. Amazingly profound conversations among these individuals that are trying to farm in their communities now. And it was a gift that I didn't even know what was, I had no idea what was going to happen. And it was a space that was just for them. Nobody else was invited. There was no witnessing happening. There was people that were present in this dialogue about what have we learned from history and what has changed, what really hasn't changed. So really profound. And then I and Gerard offered a rural humanities seminar. And in that seminar, we had students do internships with organizations around the state. So it's really amazing to have students on campus connecting. And there's so much opportunity for more of this going forward. We've also done some work where we've hosted different Black scholars and leaders to come to campus virtually or in person and share their work. We had Karen Washington, who is a longtime farmer here in New York, but also McCarthy Fellow. She's known internationally for her work in urban farming. And then Natalie Basile, who authored We Are Each Other's Harvest, and Queen Sugar. I don't know if anyone's seen that special sub-TV channel. I don't know which. But we had a really beautiful and powerful conversation about why Black land matters. And then we hosted Monica White, Dr. Monica White, author of Freedom Farmers. And then most recently last year, we had Dr. Gail Myers on campus with her new film, Rhythms of the Land. So those are the ways in which as a program, we're trying to be cultivating these conversations on campus, while we also reach out to support what's happening off campus with these communities. So you'll see here this list of different things that are happening to support the things that we know have to happen to support more Black farmers, for example. But it doesn't matter what racial identity we're talking about. I think one of the pieces that's super important on this is finding mentors, individuals who are from that identity to be teaching, training, and supporting. And that's one thing that we don't have on our landscape yet, are those individuals that are ready and able to support in those ways. So we need to find others who are able and willing to be in community and to build trust. So I wanted to just take a moment and step way out, because I think that there's some things that we have to be aware of that affect our ability to do this work effectively. And I wanted to share something I learned from a research project I worked on called the Farming and Food Narrative Project. That project was aimed at trying to figure out what are some sticky new metaphors we could use to talk about agriculture with a non-farming public, to help them actually better understand agriculture and how to invest and support the Farm Bill, frankly, or other sorts of initiatives and policy measures that are important. And the group we worked with talked about cultural models, these are like the cognitive shortcuts that we all use to manage all of the information coming at us or to understand our environment. So they are learned through years of experience, and they tend to be shared across a culture or a dominant culture, these different types of models. And we use them, like I said, to organize information. Well, we wanted to understand what are the cultural models that frame farming and farmers. That was part of like trying to understand how we use some messaging. So if you were to close your eyes right now and imagine what a farm is, just think about a farm. Like, what's an ideal farm? I asked Google, and these are the images that come up. The very idealized, bucolic image of a red barn and a Holstein cow, some animals grazing, really clean, straight rows of crops, right? Frankly, you and I would stop to take a picture of a farm like this because there are not that many of them that are this perfect. But yet these are the sorts of images that govern what agriculture is. I think that this is a problem. It's a problem because it makes invisible the complexity of farming. It makes invisible the diversity of approaches. Like there's no greenhouse operations here. There's no urban farms in these images of how people think of what a farm is. There's no diversified vegetable farms there. That may mean that. But this is, but they also then they infuse us in agriculture with a sense of competition, because suddenly we're not visible. And I think in some ways, this mental cultural model fuels a bit of division. The question of what's a real farm, what's large, why large versus small. There's only 2% of people involved in agriculture in this country. Yet why do we create divisions? Why are we trying to sort of separate? I think some of it comes from cultural models of what's the way that farming is framed in our general psyche. Similarly, if you were to think about who is a farmer, think of who comes up. Well, if I could eliminate one image from our sort of agricultural lexicon, it would be this. Because what are the adjectives that you use to describe this person? This couple. I mean, they're so boring. And bored looking, right? I just I feel like that image is like it's trapped in the minds of so many. Well, lucky for us, there are people who have actually spoofed on that to bring some humor into this. But the power of that image is huge. What we learned in our research is that farming in the public, from this is some social scientists we collaborated with, farming is rote, simple, formulaic, trial and error, and farmers are simpletons. Individuals that do a lot of hard labor to try, but they're buffeted by the winds of whatever comes at them. Well, all of the farmers I know are incredibly creative, hardworking individuals, yes, but they do deliberate things to manage their risks. They are not people that sit by and not make good decisions towards their futures. And so this is a problem in the way that the world is seeing agriculture, but these cultural models affect all of us as well. Because they create they show up as ways of resistances when we're in our work and doing our work. We face them all the time in trying to rationalize and justify what we do. And in terms of small scale farming, I think it's such an important piece because these individuals who are doing direct sales, they have the opportunity to completely contradict that cultural model, that frame. They can reinvent and redescribe agriculture because they're the face of agriculture in so many ways. Yet their value is often undermined in our general agricultural community. A small, marginal, whatever. But yet they're the ones that are actually talking with people, meeting with people, and have that chance of contradicting that. And so I bring up this idea of cultural models because I feel like we have to be alert to them if we're really wanting to do this work. There's the work we do on a day-to-day basis, but this larger sort of all of the issues of race and racism and equity, but then just the ways we're making our decisions of what agriculture is. And when we participate in those, like what I don't want to ever see on the small farms program is a pretty picture of a farm anymore. I want to see gritty. I want to see real. And because I don't want us to be collaborating with that image because it doesn't do a service. So as I mentioned earlier, talking a little bit more about agriculture and how do we come back to bringing more diversity into agriculture. Well, as you can imagine, if we really want to see more farmers of color, many of these are going to be individuals that come from urban farming experiences. They're going to be having suddenly discovered farming and discovered growing food in a community where they're being witnessed by a lot of people in their community that look like them and are similar to them, but then they get the bug and they're ready to scale up. And urban land is very tight. So they start to look to move to rural places. And then they end up coming into a place and landing in a rural place where they don't fit the dominant cultural model of who is a farmer. And they don't have those social networks or connections. So they feel that alienation. They may even come against some intimidation. When we talk about supporting new farms, and we always focus in on those 4 topics: access to land, access to capital, access to infrastructure and networks. But we rarely talk about having access to a really supportive community. And so it makes me think a lot about right to farm. And right to farm protects farmers who might have neighbors who sort of show up in their neighborhood and they move to rural places because I think it's beautiful, but then there's someone not so happy with something they smell or something they see. So Right to Farm protects the right to be able to do farming. How do we lean into safe to farm? Where an individual can choose to farm, but not have to deal with nuisance neighbors who don't necessarily like what they see. This requires an entirely different kind of support system, one in which all of us have to be intentional and to show up. So supportive social networks, that's not new stuff. And in fact, I worked with a bunch of social scientists on mapping the networks of farmers, how they work together. And what was so interesting in that work was sort of understanding how these networks form and then how they're organized and managed. So we surveyed a bunch of farmer networks in the Northeast and asked them to tell us, who do you go for information? Then each of the dots on the map represents an individual, and the lines that connect them are where they go for information. So in this case, we have a social network where you see a few connections between people, maybe one or two, and there's the bigger the square, the more dominant that person is in the network for its function. Here's one that is much more robust. There's a lot more connections. A lot of people are talking to each other. There's more people that are in the middle that are sharing information. They become important resource hubs. And then here's another one. This one, there's a huge hive of activity that's going on and connecting everybody. But there's still a few dominant characters in the middle that if they disappeared, it could be a problem for this type. So this is a way of visualizing connection. And how do we visualize? And then you can make intention to build the ways that people are connected in that network. The first one was one that was led by 2 extension educators, and 2 years after our project, that dissolved. The second one is a cooperative that continues today, super vibrant cooperative of growers. This one is a farmer-to-farmer learning network that is responsible for the majority of organic grain production in New York. And it continues today. It's been in existence for over 20 years. So how do we get into building intentional networks? And so I want to share with you some examples for us in how we think about this at the Cornell Small Farms Program. And we do it by trying to build, we can provide the information, the knowledge, the resources, the information to do farming. But the other thing that we know we have to do to support diversity is really think intentionally how we build these networks. Supportive networks where people can feel safe. They can feel like they have a collaborative circle. And we do this with many different communities, but I'm going to highlight 4 for you. And then we can sort of have a conversation after that. Our Farm Ops program, and Nina Saley and Bailey Colvin are leading that, and has been built over several years in providing veteran-only spaces for people to gather and talk, learn from each other, and they connect from their own past towards their own future. These are individuals that have many different skills and abilities that are perfectly suitable to agriculture, and we support them in discovering that. We just finished a 1-week intensive training in the Hudson Valley called Arm to Farm, and there's a buzz that continues from those farmers who were there. We're hearing about it now still. And so this is one example of where, and both Nina and Bailey have veteran connection. And Nina was a veteran and Bailey's a veteran spouse. They understand this group. So they're of the group and are able to represent and connect. We, as part of our effort with dealing and leaning into equity, our Equitable Farm Futures initiative is working across many different groups, but particularly with Latino, Latina, Latinx farmers. This, as I mentioned earlier, 55,000 individuals supporting agriculture and only 600 actually producing is just not acceptable. We can do better. And so the program itself, our Furon Egg Program, which has 4 staff members that are fully bilingual now. Mildred Alvarado, Tim Shank, who's here with us, Maria Jose Oviedo, and Suli Valdez are all hosting together different types of training, online courses fully in Spanish. Part of our online course portfolio now has Spanish first classes and resources and materials. We built out a part of our website that is fully bilingual. And we're very excited because all of the efforts in the training have started to create a community that continues to work together. And one way that they're working together is through peer-to-peer farmer groups, through Juntos Aprendemos. And that group, around themes, around business planning and business development, folks are coming together and supporting each other to think about how do we better ourselves as entrepreneurs and managers of other people and farms. But all of that is leading to, we're hosting the first ever Latino agricultural conference in December. We're super excited because December 7th and 8th, this will be the first fully Spanish. It's a Spanish first conference. If you're interested in joining it, our bilingual, let us know. We have folks coming from all over the state and other parts of the Northeast to be in this space, which centers the needs and interests of this community. So there's individuals who are aspiring to farm, who are already farming, or work on farms that are going to be together to imagine what does it look like to have a Latino farmer organization in the state or a greater support network. An entirely different kind of example is from our work with mushroom production. And we started out a project that was funded by NIFA that was meant to grow commercial mushroom operations. But what we learned very quickly in some of the work in urban spaces is that there's a lot of people who have this passion for mushrooms, but they're not really interested in selling them, but they're really interested in teaching others how to grow them. And so as a wonderful alternate protein source, but then also for foraging and other interests and growing on logs or growing in bags, we recognized that there was a different approach needed. And so created the Community Mushroom Educators Network. And that network has grown to 146 different individuals across the country now that have taken their passion for growing mushrooms and are sharing it in their communities delivered. From that, we've graduated people that are sort of certified to be educators. And then 8 of those are teaching with us on our online courses. So, but you can see from the demographics that this is split between individuals who would identify as white and not, because we know that the community of people that are passionate about this, if they're going to grow into commercial production, we have to start where they are. And it may not be that all of them are interested in farming commercially, but they will certainly be able to support each other in exploring that. And then the final example I'd like to share is around our Bwell Farming project and reconnecting with purpose. And this project and this work is entirely different because it really centers wellness. And you may be surprised to think of a small farms program doing that, but yet when we think about the 3 pillars of sustainability, we are all focused so heavily on economic or environmental, but yet the social pillar, we kind of expect to just happen by, I don't know, sprinkling a little fairy dust and you know a socially sustainable farm when you see it. We feel that you can intentionally cultivate and reweave social networks and social fabric. And this is one way that we're doing it with a mix of farmers. And so, for example, in Violet Stone leads this. It's been inspired, and we're so grateful for Marsha E. Sheebley's work in helping us, and we connect with the Center for Courage and Renewal that's at the foundation of how we do this work. But in our Reconnect with Purpose, this brings together service providers across many different races. And at the end of the last one, where I was co-teaching this with Violet, 2 women who identified as Black sat down with me, and they said to me that when they walked into this space, they looked around the room and they were like, oh, here we go again. Here I am, I represent, and they were like, I had to hold myself back. I had to hold myself in a stance of protection, self-protection. And they said, now it was transforming because they finally felt seen. They felt seen. They felt like people really saw them and completely comfortable. That happened because of intention. And it happened in creating space and time for people to build relationships. So all of this is part of how do we reweave our social fabric to support diversity. It's like being in relationship. The place that we want to build more relationships is in working with our Native communities. And I hope you all are aware of the land grab study that was published in High Country News, which makes it a little challenging for a place like Cornell to be saying, I really want to work with you, when the lands that supported our endowment were taken from Native communities around the country. But we, Eric and I, and many others in the extension are part of a new project, and we're really grateful to be part of that, of restoring relationships. And to go slow, and to get to know folks. We spent time with the Haudenosaunee and the Cayuga farm up in the Syracuse area a few weeks ago, and are looking forward to what comes next. So that is how I just wanted to give you all an overview of some of the ways as a program, all of us are leaning into supporting a more diverse and equitable food system. We know that the work will be slow, but we also know it has to be filled with intention and good mind and good heart. It's not enough to just teach people what to do. It's about where we create a place for them to experiment and grow as individuals. And so with that, I would love to end with a poem. And I'm going to read it because I think it sort of captures what we do. Community. Somewhere there are people to whom we can speak with passion, without having the words catch in our throats. Somewhere a circle of hands will open to receive us. Eyes will light up as we enter. Voices will celebrate with us whenever we come into our own power. Community means strength that joins our strength to the work that needs to be done. Arms to hold us when we falter. A circle of healing, a circle of friends. Someplace where we can be free. Thank you.
I really love all the points brought up about represented agriculture, what people think of a farmer or a grower. But I actually students want to get involved with, like, what is involved in the plan?
So we, with the Small Farms program, we have a lot of summer student interns that we have and we host, and so we're always welcoming folks into that. I've had graduate students, so sometimes there's a mix of that. And historically, there's a lot of students that I've interacted with that are on different internships like with CCE. But we're open to conversation. We welcome folks to be collaborating with us, even to be joining us in our classes. So one exciting development is we have a student who's going to be teaching one of our online classes, Aaliyah. She's going to be teaching our soil health class, a talented individual. And we're just really excited for her to be able to share her knowledge and wisdom with some of the farmers that are really interested in soil health. So we would welcome that as well. Each of you has something to share with us. Thank you. Any other questions?
And you might ping Geneva as well if they have questions.
How do I do that?
Well, you just say Geneva.
Geneva, do you have questions?
and maybe
for anyone else
show
online
up on the chat.
Yeah. So Anu, I remember you and I were talking about some opportunity to work with Black farmers, vegetable farmers in New York, and we looked at the ag statistics from quite a bit earlier than 2017 and saw that they existed in principle, but not part of our networks, weren't showing up at meetings. It just looked like a really, really hard problem.
It is.
And I just have to say, I am amazed how far you've taken it. Not only finding where they were, where the potential farmers were, what their needs were, building networks. It's just absolutely outstanding. So if anybody thought what you did was easy, really want to dispel that.
Well, thank you, Thomas. But I'm just going to uplift the team. It's, and all of our collaborators, like, this is a joint effort. None of this can happen in isolation. We are working really hard to keep building these connections. So thank you. Yes.
About isolation and tension, maybe, like within the farming community. And I'm just curious how you see like consumer ideas about where our food comes from playing into some of the challenges like farmer connections.
You know, it's so interesting that you say that, because I feel like in some ways where our food come from, it can play into, this is where we have to really define that and deal with some of those cultural models. We have to be like, elevating stories. And so I will say that in the Bwell Farming and retreats that we had, we did both virtual and online. We had in person, we had so many new farmers who came. And they came because they felt isolated. So farming in itself is, you know, rural places, and farming, you are kind of out there on your own doing your thing. But the power of finding ways to connect and collaborate, I think, is really important. And one of the ways we're seeing emerging collaborations, particularly in the Latino community, is an interest in a food hub. And so trying to find a way to collaborate to sell products, because if you're small scale, you may not have enough to go wholesale, but together you may have enough. And then you can also create with that a package and a story and other things that are worked on behalf of the community. So we're building and supporting, we're supporting the building of this community and trying to bring people together. Our conference is going to be one of those ways. It's their conference. We as educators and service providers are there to sort of hold the conversation. But yeah, so that's one of the aspirations, and it's certainly a dream. Other questions?
Yeah, as somebody who worked in a specific commodity-based extension program, it always amazes me when people work across a lot of different things. So my question is, you know, for specific problems that emerge, you know, pest problem or cultural problem, I mean, how do you connect with those sorts of programs?
So we work, like right now, we're working really closely with many different partners, particularly with organizing this conference, but we're working with Ag Workforce because we do some work directly with the people that are employed on farms, and so do they. So how do we collaborate on that work? We work with IPM program and hosting field days, for example, that are Spanish first. What we need are people to speak Spanish to be able to speak directly and allow those participants to actually communicate directly about the things they're seeing. And so we are still providing the traditional services of sort of technical know-how, but wanting to also complement that with real conversations that can affect long-term change. When we started this work with the Latino community, we had listening sessions. We had 90 farm employees show up at these. And they had a list of what they wanted, and almost all of them said, I want to speak English better. I don't know if they said that, but they wanted to be, they saw it as a secret to advancement, a way for them to advance their own interests. And then that is the language of business in this country. But they also wanted to be better managers. They wanted to know how to work with computers. So one of the things that we do when we're in a training is we take iPads and notebooks, give people teach them how to use Zoom so they can communicate with each other differently, but then be collaborating and networking with us. So sometimes, because this is some of these communities have a very different history and may not have the same literacy that we're used to working with, we have to be creative in how we share information. You know, and so that part of it is a really important step, is first knowing who you're working with and getting to know them, and then being really clear on how to best share things for them.
Thanks.
And we, one other thing we do is we are finding farmers that are collaborating with us as educators. They're of the community, and they know, so that's a really important piece as well. All right.
Okay, great.
Thank you, everybody.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.